Pepper and George love playing together outside, but on this day, leaving the house was the worst decision. The storm caused terrible losses to their family. That day, Pepper went with George for a picnic outside. They took toys with them, and under the sunny weather, they ate cookies with juice. As soon as they finished, they heard thunder. A storm was approaching, and Mummy Pig called them to go home as quickly as possible. Daddy Pig wasn't worried about it, but the sky was getting darker and darker. But then it turned out that Pepper had left a toy in the garden, and Daddy Pig went to retrieve it, not thinking about his safety. He went down to the toy, and then lightning struck. Lightning struck a tree he was standing too close to. He fell unconscious. His family watched this happen. Pepper and George were scared, and Mummy Pig ran to call an ambulance. But when she dialed the number, she realized that the connection wasn't working because of the storm. She told Pepper to stay at home, and she herself ran to Daddy Pig. He lay unconscious under the cold rain, but he had a pulse. Mummy Pig was glad that he was alive. She thought she could carry him home. But when she tried to pull him home, she couldn't do it. He weighed too much, and the path home was slippery from the rain. She could never have carried him up the hill to the house. Mummy Pig ran to the nearest neighbors, leaving George and Pepper alone. They sat at home and shuddered at every roll of thunder. Meanwhile, Daddy Pig was still alive. He began to regain consciousness, but was paralyzed. Because the rain didn't stop, a puddle began to form under him. When Mummy Pig tried to move him, she left him face down. Now, in addition to hypothermia from the cold and wetness, his face was pressed right into the mud. It was getting harder for him to breathe. Almost an hour later, the storm had already ended, and at that time, Mummy Pig came with Dr. Brown Bear. But Daddy Pig was no longer breathing. After a long time, Mummy Pig continues to blame herself for this, and Pepper and George will never stop being afraid of thunder. Daddy Pig remembered his childhood, how he used to love to go camping, make fires, and admire nature. He hadn't been outdoors for a long time and wanted to do it again. But what he didn't take into account was that he had changed since then, and that led to disastrous consequences. The mistakes started at the camping stage. He took food, water, and a tent, but the tent was too small. It was the same old tent he had slept in before. Additionally, Daddy Pig took along a raincoat that would protect them from the rain, and they went. When they arrived, they looked around. It was the nature he had missed. And as they started to settle in, they noticed that the tent was very small.
That's weird. I felt like it was much bigger.
You've grown since then, and your tummy has grown the most of all.
When it began to get dark, they built a fire. Finally, he could eat. He was tired from pitching the tent and gathering branches for the fire. His legs were sore from walking up and down the hills. All he wanted to do was just lie down and rest.
You're too big. You should have brought a bigger tent.
I like sleeping in the open air even more, though.
Daddy Pig lay down on the grass. He was uncomfortable. The small stones were digging into his back, and the ground was cold. However, there was a warm fire nearby and a beautiful night sky. It calmed and lulled him to sleep. But suddenly his stomach rumbled with hunger. He couldn't sleep hungry. He laid down his cloak and sat by the fire, trying to scrape the leftover food out of the cans. He used to have enough of this tin to fill himself up, but he hadn't taken into account that a lot of time had passed since then. He had taken too little food. It seemed like it couldn't get any worse. Now he's definitely not going to sleep here. The fire's out, and the rain will make him freeze. But there was still an option to wait in the car. He walked to the car as fast as he could to avoid getting wet and tried to open the door. He forgot his car keys in his raincoat. Because of the trees and the fact that the fire was out, he couldn't see where the tent was, but he remembered the approximate direction. But the slippery ground and his fatigue played their part. He went the wrong way and eventually realized he was lost. He tried to shout, but everyone was asleep and no one would have heard him over the noise of the rain. Camping was not successful. He just sat in the cold rain. He had already forgotten about hunger. Now, besides the fact that his legs were aching from the physical exertion, they were starting to aching from the cold. It scared him that no one would help him. He needed to take matters into his own hands. He saw a cave. It seemed dry inside. He could spend the night there, and by morning the rain would be over and he could find help. He tried to squeeze in with all his might, but his stomach clenched like in a vice. He tried to move back, but a cold stone pressed against his back. He kept trying to shift some way, but his stomach was too big. At the end, he realized that he couldn't get out, that he was stuck here and couldn't help himself. Fear and panic enveloped his body. And the next morning, his family found him, dead. Peppa Pig loves to go to the beach with her family. On this sunny day, they were going to have a vacation together. When they arrived, the beach was empty. There was no one around. However, that was just the way they liked it. A vacation for one family that no one would disturb. Peppa went to play ball with George. Daddy Pig wanted to play with them, but Peppa had her own idea. She really wanted to bury him in the sand. It seemed to her that it was just a fun activity that couldn't hurt. But she was wrong. After Peppa and George buried him under the sand, he felt the heat of the scorching sun, and he began to fall asleep. Peppa and George were making sand castles. They were playing together so much that they completely forgot that Daddy Pig was lying buried in the sand. At that point, his body temperature had risen to dangerous levels. Lying under the sun in the heat while he was sleeping, he didn't notice how he was in this situation. He started sweating profusely. His heart started beating fast. His temperature rose so much that he got a heat stroke. At this time, Mummy Pig and the children had played and started to go back. But suddenly they saw a hat on a heap of sand standing in the water, which was brought by the tide. Mummy Pig didn't realize what it was at first, but then she remembered Peppa burying Daddy Pig in the sand. While they were playing, there was a rush of water. She told the children to stand on the shore. She ran there and, standing waist deep in the water, removed his hat. Daddy Pig was unconscious. She started to dig out his top half, but his body started to fall into the water. She tried to hold him down. Their children were watching from the shore. They were scared to see it, but there was nothing they could do to help because Mummy Pig told them to stand still. Mummy Pig managed to get him safely onto the water. She couldn't carry him off because of his great weight. But things got worse. The low tide had started to come in. She only had to hold him, waiting for the tide to go out. Otherwise, he would be swept out to sea and have no chance of surviving. But suddenly, Peppa, ignoring the instructions, ran towards them. Peppa, who had been running to meet Mummy Pig, now got caught in the current herself and was being carried through the water. Mummy Pig could not swim to her by saving Daddy Pig. She had to make a choice. She had to save someone alone. She let go of Daddy Pig's body and swam after Peppa. George was crying as he watched the situation from the shore, and Mummy Pig managed to save Peppa. Sitting down on the sand, they watched Daddy Pig being carried far away on the waves, and there was nothing they could do to help. Peppa Pig's family loves to visit the amusement park during holidays, having a wonderful time. But this time, something went wrong and turned out very, very badly. This is the balloon ride incident. As soon as they arrived, they saw Mrs. Rabbit doing a raffle. Peppa bought a ticket and won the balloon ride with her family. Peppa dreamed of trying a hot air balloon ride, and now her dream was coming true. As they began their flight, Mrs. Rabbit said it was her first time flying a balloon. Daddy Pig was alarmed by this. He thought about stopping the flight and going back, but he didn't want to spoil Peppa's fun. Once they were high enough, it turned out that Mrs. Rabbit didn't even know how to use the map, which further showed her incompetence. Looking around, Peppa dropped her favorite toy, and they decided to go down to find it. Daddy Pig lifted Teddy from the tree, but at that moment no one was looking where the balloon was going. The balloon got stuck in a tree. There was no one in sight. They were alone in the middle of the forest. After studying the map, Daddy Pig realized that they were very far from everyone. They called for help with a loudspeaker for several hours, but no one answered. At this point, Daddy Pig decided that due to the distance from the others, they could wait for help for days, so he'd better carefully climb down the tree and go for help. However, when he climbed down the tree, his foot slipped and in an attempt to grab the tree, he badly scratched his hands and finally fell. As soon as he regained consciousness, he felt pain. His leg was broken. His family was shocked, but he said that the bruises were minor and that he would be able to get to the help he needed so badly. At that moment, this idea seemed good to him. Because of the adrenaline rush, his pain was dulled. His family dissuaded him, but he walked in the direction of the nearest settlement. At first he walked with a limp, then began to crawl, then stopped. Peppa Pig watched as his body lay motionless, not responding to being called. Mrs. Rabbit realized that it was all her fault. She decided to climb down the tree to give Daddy Pig first aid. She had rock climbing skills, but she did not take into account that there were traces of Daddy Pig's blood on the tree, from which she slipped and fell right on her neck. Her body lay motionless. Peppa and George cried. It was too dangerous to climb down themselves, and all that remained was to hope that help would come. Help arrived about an hour after the incident. The locals saw where the balloon was going, and after it did not return for a long time, they became worried and went in that direction. That day, they lost 2 valuable persons. It all started when Daddy Pig was tired. He was tired of work and family, and he wanted to be alone for a day. This day, he was able to take a day off from work and go to the forest instead. It was a place where he could have some quiet time to himself. He took some food and his phone and went to the forest. He went to the forest without telling anyone. This is the reason for the horrible situation he got into. He stopped the car in the middle of the road and walked into the woods. Here he could think without the distractions of family. He walked deeper and deeper into the forest until he finally found a clearing. He laid out a picnic on it, but suddenly remembered that he had forgotten his lighter in the car to start a fire. It was far enough away from the car, but he decided to walk there and back. There was no sign of trouble. He walked the same route, but halfway there he heard a crunch. A tree had fallen on him. Now Daddy Pig was lying on the grass, pinned down by the massive tree. He couldn't move to get out. The tree was pressing down on him so hard that he could barely breathe. For such cases, he has a phone in his backpack. All he has to do is get it out and call for help. He opens his backpack but doesn't find his phone. Daddy Pig left his phone at the picnic site, and now he has no hope of salvation. He screamed, calling for help, but there was no one in the woods. The next day, his back began to hurt seriously. He began to suffer from hunger and lack of movement. He could put up with the hunger, but the next morning he ran out of water. He stayed thirsty until the evening until it started to rain. He collected rainwater in a bottle. The pain was constant, but what truly tormented him was the fear of never seeing his family again. So he survived day by day, growing weaker and weaker. It had been at least a week. He had stopped counting the days. He lay there and imagined that he would be gone. He should have told everyone where he was going. He should have kept his phone with him at all times. At that moment, he felt that he could breathe freely, and gripped by hope, he tried again to get out from under the tree. He succeeded. He had lost a terrible amount of weight, which allowed him to squeeze through. Now he was free, but days of lying in one position had taken their toll. He couldn't get up. His body had weakened and all he could do was crawl. He could crawl to the car, but the picnic has food and a phone, that's all he needs. He headed that way. It was incredibly difficult. With every movement, he had a feeling he was about to pass out. But the thought that he would be able to eat and call for help motivated him. However, when he crawled, he realized a terrible thing. The food he laid out had already rotted or been eaten by birds. He tried to call his family, but the phone was broken. Perhaps it happened because of the water that got on it during the rain. Daddy Pig might have guessed, but he was no longer guided by reason. He should have crawled to the car then, although it is unlikely that he could drive a car in such a state. Now, all he could do was crawl and crawl towards the car, hoping that he could get out of the forest. On this day, the temperature dropped to record levels. It had not been that cold for years. But it was Richard's birthday, and George wanted to go to Richard's birthday party. So he brought a present for his friend, a cake in the shape of a carrot. Peppa couldn't go with him, She was ill and Mummy Pig had to look after her.
Daddy Pig, are you sure you want to go? I have a bad feeling about this. The weather report said it's dangerous to drive in this snowfall.
No need to worry. I've driven in worse weather. I'll call you when I arrive.
Mummy Pig trusted him and wrapped George in clothes. Daddy Pig put on some quite warm clothes, but they turned out to be not meant for this weather. They went outside and got in the car. Daddy Pig drove to Richard's house. The drive must have been about an hour. The car stalled. He decided that it wasn't far to the rabbit's house and they could just walk there. Otherwise, they might freeze in the car. He took the present and matches and walked with George. After a few minutes of walking, he was already starting to feel his nose and cheekbones going numb. George was walking behind him. He was quite warm in his clothes. The visibility was getting worse, but they had to keep moving to make it. Daddy Pig wished he had worn something warmer. He realized that he would freeze his nose and cheeks, which would hurt for several days. The snowstorm was over. By now he should have reached the rabbit's house, but looking around he realized he was in an unknown place. The tracks had been covered, but he didn't panic yet. He realized that if he walked in one direction, he could reach a road that would take him to some settlement, and maybe even someone would drive by and rescue them. As he walked, he thought about the fact that this frost was the worst he had ever encountered. Suddenly, George said he was hungry. The only food was the present he had for Richard. Daddy Pig took off his gloves, unwrapped the present. It took no more than 15 seconds, and yet his fingers were numb. As he held the cake in his hands, he realized it was hard as a rock. He definitely needed to start a fire. While he was thinking about it, his toes went numb from the cold. He got scared and started pacing back and forth to warm them. He stomped until he felt the warmth returning. He stacked the wood, got matches, and very carefully started a fire. Warming themselves by the fire, they finished the cake. He thought he was going to be a few hours late. As soon as they moved away from the fire, he felt that frost again. But he felt he could still walk for a long time. With his weight, he broke through the crust of ice. He didn't notice the pond in front of him. This brought out Daddy Pig. This problem would delay him another hour. He knew he had to dry his clothes immediately. It is impossible to warm feet if they are wet. As he built the fire, he took off his glove and his fingers were instantly numb. It was strange to him how his hands behaved from the cold. It was as if they no longer belonged to his body. When he touched a branch, he had to look at his hand to make sure he had actually grabbed it. The fire was getting hotter. In a minute, he would be able to lay thick boughs, and then he would throw off his wet shoes and warm his feet by the fire. It was his fault. He should not have put the fire under the fir tree, for there was a lot of snow on it. Daddy Pig was scared, as if he had heard his own death sentence. For about a minute, he sat there without moving, just looking at the buried fire. Even if he managed to get the fire going again, he would probably lose several toes. His fingers weren't moving anymore, so he wasn't pulling individual branches, but gathering them by handfuls. And George stood by and watched the whole thing. Daddy Pig was tormented by the thought that his feet were stiffening more and more. He began to feel envious of George, who was dressed very warmly and not wet. He couldn't get the match out of the box. While he was trying to stick it out, the whole pack fell into the snow. He wanted to pick them up, but he couldn't. His fingers wouldn't obey his will. The solution came. He pulled the match out with his teeth. He inhaled the acrid smoke and coughed. He couldn't get one match out of the pack, so he grabbed the whole pack with the palms of his hands. A bright flame erupted. He lit branches with it, and finally, he was able to get the fire going. He began to put small branches on the fire. Fire is life. It must not be missed. He looked around desperately and saw George, who had been standing next to him all this time. He was shocked to see this. However, Daddy Pig was beginning to lose his mind. A thought flashed through his mind. He remembered a story where someone had killed an animal and crawled inside the body to wait out the night. He would kill George and plunge his hands into its warm body to warm and revive them. Then he would build a new fire. Daddy Pig pounced on him, and then he realized that his hands couldn't grip and his fingers wouldn't bend. He squeezed George in his hands and stood like that for a while. He realized that it was physically impossible for him to kill George. At this moment, he realized the danger. It was no longer a question of whether he would freeze his fingers and toes off, or even whether he would lose his hands and feet. It was now a matter of life and death, and there was no hope of rescue. Panic-stricken terror seized him, and he ran. He ran without thought, without purpose, in a fear he had never felt before. The blood rushed a little to his limbs. Maybe if he kept running, his legs would warm up. Maybe he could even make it to the house where they were now celebrating a birthday. Sure, a few fingers and toes were frozen solid, but his friends would take care of him. But in his mind, he knew he didn't have long to live.
Hi? What happened? No, he's not here. I thought Daddy Pig stayed home. I hope they find him soon. Everything's gonna be fine. He's survived situations worse than this.